The rain hammered against the tin roof of the Naval Hospital on Saipan like bullets. July 1944. Eleanor Hartwell wiped the sweat from her forehead, her white nurse's uniform stained with blood that wasn't hers. She was 23 years old, and she had been awake for 38 hours straight. Around her, wounded American soldiers screamed, cried, called for their mothers in voices so broken they barely sounded human. The smell of gangrene and disinfectant burned her nostrils. This was her third month in hell, and every single day felt longer than the last. Eleanor had arrived at the hospital in May, fresh from her training in San Francisco. She had been so young then, so full of purpose. The recruitment posters had called to her. A nurse's hands save lives. She had believed it completely. Her mother had cried at the train station, but Eleanor had felt brave. She was going to help. She was going to matter. The first week in Saipan had shattered that innocence. She had watched a 19-year-old boy from Iowa die because infection had set in too deep. She had held his hand while he called for his mother, and she had not been able to save him. That was when she understood that being a nurse did not mean you always won. Sometimes, no matter how hard you tried, you lost. Dr. Samuel Wright burst through the canvas flap separating the wards, his face flushed with frustration. Behind him, 2 Marine guards dragged something. Someone. A woman. Japanese. Her black hair was matted with dried blood, her prison clothes torn, her bare feet leaving bloody prints on the concrete floor. She could not have weighed more than 90 pounds. When she saw Eleanor, the woman's eyes went wide with pure terror. She began to shake uncontrollably, her entire body convulsing as if she were seized by fever. She started to scream, high-pitched and desperate, words pouring out in rapid Japanese that Eleanor did not understand. But the meaning was unmistakable. Please do not hurt me. Please do not kill me. Please, God, do not let them hurt me. Put her in the corner, Wright said, his voice flat and dismissive. Treat her wounds. Orders from command. Do not waste good supplies. She is enemy. Eleanor stared at him. The Japanese woman was sobbing now. Her whole body racked with sobs so violent she could barely stand. The Marines had to hold her up. Wright did not even look at her. He had already turned away, moving to the next patient, the next problem to be solved. Eleanor wanted to ask him why. Why would they bring a prisoner here if she was the enemy? Why would they give her to the nurses if they did not want her cared for? But she knew better than to question Dr. Wright. He had made it clear on her first day that the hospital was run by military logic, not civilian sentiment. Sentiment had no place here. Sentiment got people killed. Eleanor picked up her medical kit with hands that suddenly felt very heavy. She stood slowly and walked toward the corner where the guards had placed the Japanese woman. Around her, the ward had gone silent. Every American soldier who could lift his head turned to look. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Eleanor could feel their eyes on her, burning into her back. She could hear what they were thinking. Why would you help her? She is the reason your friends are dead. She is the reason we are here. She is the reason we are bleeding. Private Jimmy O'Connor, missing his left leg below the knee, spat on the floor, his face twisted with rage. You gonna waste bandages on that? He demanded, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. My buddies are dead because of them. Tommy Delgado, Marcus Williams, both of them good men, both of them dead because of Japanese soldiers. And you are going to sit there and patch up one of theirs? That is not nursing, Miss Hartwell. That is betrayal. Eleanor felt every eye on her. She felt the weight of their judgment, their anger, their grief. They had lost brothers and friends. They had seen things that no human should have to see. She understood their rage. She felt it too sometimes, late at night when she lay in her cot and thought about the boy from Iowa. But she also understood something else. She understood that rage, once it started, did not stop. It kept growing. It kept consuming. And if she let it consume her, if she let it tell her that some lives mattered more than others, then what was she doing here? What was the point of being a nurse if she only healed the people she thought deserved it? She did not answer Private O'Connor. She simply knelt down slowly, keeping her hands visible, moving with deliberate calm. The Japanese woman pressed herself against the wall, trembling so violently her teeth chattered. Eleanor had never felt so watched in her life. Every breath she took seemed to be scrutinized. Every movement was a statement. She opened her medical kit. The woman closed her eyes, waiting for the blow, waiting for the violence she had been told would come. Instead, Eleanor dipped a clean cloth in warm water and gently began to clean the gash above the woman's left eye. The woman's eyes flew open. She stared at Eleanor like she was seeing a ghost, like she was seeing something impossible. Eleanor worked in silence, cleaning wounds with methodical precision, applying sulfa powder, wrapping bandages. The woman's right arm was broken. Eleanor could see the way it hung at an unnatural angle. She splinted it with wooden tongue depressors and gauze, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. As she worked, she became aware of the silence in the ward. The soldiers were watching, yes, but they were no longer making noise. They were simply watching, observing, perhaps trying to understand. When Eleanor was done with the bandages, she brought a tin cup of water. The woman looked at it like it might be poison. Eleanor understood. She had read the propaganda too. Everyone had. The government told them that Americans were monsters, that they would torture prisoners, that they would do unspeakable things. She had believed it, in the abstract way that people believe things they have never experienced. But now, faced with this woman's terror, Eleanor realized how the propaganda worked. It made the unthinkable seem inevitable. It made people assume the worst. And once you assumed the worst, once you believed that the other side was capable of anything, then anything became possible. Violence became justified. Cruelty became necessary. Eleanor took a sip from the cup first, slowly and deliberately. She wanted the woman to see that the water was safe, that no poison lurked in it. She wanted to communicate something across the barrier of language and war and fear. She wanted to say, I will not hurt you. I see you. You are a person, just like me. The woman watched her drink, her eyes tracking every movement. Then Eleanor offered the cup again. This time, shaking hands accepted it. The woman drank like someone who had been lost in the desert for days. She drank like her life depended on it. When she finished, Eleanor brought a blanket. Clean. Dry. She draped it over the woman's shoulders. The woman clutched it and began to cry silently, tears cutting clean lines through the dirt on her face. What is your name? Eleanor asked softly, knowing she would not be understood. The woman looked up. Harumi, she whispered. Harumi Nakamura. Eleanor pointed to herself. Eleanor Hartwell. For just a moment, in a hospital filled with enemies and dying men, two women looked at each other and saw something neither expected to find. Humanity. Recognition. The understanding that underneath the uniforms and the propaganda and the fear, they were just two women trying to survive a war that neither of them had chosen. Over the next 6 days, Eleanor changed Harumi's bandages with meticulous care. She brought her food even when it meant taking a smaller portion for herself. She sat with her when the nightmares made her scream, when she thrashed in her sleep and called out for people who were probably dead. Eleanor did not know who these people were. Maybe her family, maybe her friends, maybe the life she had lived before the war took everything from her. But she sat there anyway, and sometimes she held Harumi's hand, and sometimes she simply sat in the dark and let the woman know that she was not alone. The other soldiers watched. Some of them were angry, some of them were confused. But gradually, something shifted. Eleanor noticed Private O'Connor watching her one afternoon, his face unreadable. She was changing Harumi's arm bandage, and Harumi was crying silently, the pain too much to bear. Eleanor spoke to her softly, in English that Harumi could not possibly understand, but somehow the tone communicated. It said, I know it hurts. I am sorry it hurts. But you are going to be okay. You are going to survive this. O'Connor stared at them for a long moment. Then he looked away. The next day, Eleanor found a small can of condensed milk next to Harumi's cot. She knew it had come from O'Connor. He had given up his own rations. He did not speak to her about it. He did not want credit for it. But the gesture was there, the small crack in his armor, the moment when he stopped seeing Harumi as the enemy and started seeing her as a person. On the 7th day, Eleanor arrived for her shift and Harumi was gone. Transferred, Wright said, not looking up from his paperwork. Probably to a POW camp in Hawaii. That is the last you will see of her. He was right. For 40 years, that was the last Eleanor saw of Harumi Nakamura. Eleanor Hartwell retired from nursing in 1979. She had spent 35 years in hospitals, watching people die, watching them heal, watching them struggle against the limits of medicine and fate. She had married briefly in 1952, a kind man named Thomas who had wanted children, but Eleanor had discovered that her capacity for love had been damaged by the war. She could care for people in the abstract as patients, but the intimate kind of love that required vulnerability and trust had become impossible for her. Thomas had not understood. He had thought that time would heal her, that children would give her something to live for. But Eleanor had known, even then, that some wounds did not heal. They just became part of who you were. After the divorce, Eleanor had thrown herself into her work. She had become a supervisor at Portland General Hospital, training young nurses, pushing them to care for every patient with the same dignity and respect, regardless of who they were or where they came from. Her colleagues thought she was strict. They did not understand that she was teaching them something essential. She was teaching them that the person in the bed was a human being, that their suffering mattered, that one person's kindness could ripple through time in ways you could never predict. She bought a small house in Portland, Oregon, with a garden where she grew tomatoes and roses. The house was quiet, too quiet, sometimes. She had a cat named Patches. She volunteered at the library on weekends. She read voraciously, especially history. She wanted to understand the war. She wanted to understand why it had happened and what it meant. She had read about the atomic bombs, about the firebombing of Tokyo, about the millions who had died. She had wondered about Harumi. Had she survived the war? Had she made it home? Had she lived a good life? Eleanor had never found out. It was one of the great unresolved questions of her life. On a Tuesday morning in October 1984, someone knocked on her door. Eleanor, now 63, her hair silver, her hands marked with age spots, opened it carefully. 4 men stood on her porch. They wore formal uniforms, Japanese self-defense force, dress blues, medals, white gloves, insignia that Eleanor could not quite read but that clearly indicated rank and authority. Eleanor's heart stopped. For a moment she could not breathe. She had not thought about Saipan in years. She had pushed those memories down so deep that she had almost forgotten they were there. But seeing these men in their uniforms, she was transported back. She was 23 years old again. She was standing in a hospital ward, feeling the weight of judgment from every direction, making a choice that she did not even fully understand at the time. "Miss Eleanor Hartwell?" the youngest one asked in careful English. His name tag read Fujimoto. He was perhaps 40 years old, with kind eyes and a slight accent that made him seem both foreign and familiar. "Yes," Eleanor said, her voice barely a whisper. She gripped the doorframe to steady herself. "We have traveled a very long way to find you," Fujimoto continued. "May we come in?" Eleanor stepped aside, her mind racing. What could they possibly want? Why would Japanese military officials come to her house in Portland? What had she done? Had she broken some law by treating a Japanese prisoner? Had that moment in 1944 somehow followed her through all these years, waiting to catch up with her? The 4 men entered her small living room and stood at attention. They were very formal, very stiff, very proper. Eleanor gestured for them to sit, but they remained standing until she sat first. Only then did they settle themselves on her worn couch, looking uncomfortable in her shabby living room with its faded wallpaper and old furniture. The oldest, his chest covered in ribbons, stepped forward. "I am Captain Hiroshi Tanaka of the Japan Self-Defense Forces. This is Commander Masaru Ito, Major Takeshi Kobayashi, and Lieutenant Akira Fujimoto. We are here on behalf of someone who could not make this journey herself." Eleanor's hands were shaking. She clasped them together in her lap. "Someone?" she asked. Tanaka reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. Old, yellowed, worn from being handled many times. He held it with both hands and bowed slightly before presenting it to Eleanor. Eleanor took it as if it were made of glass. Her hands were trembling so badly that she could barely hold it steady. She opened it slowly. Inside was a letter, written in English in careful, neat handwriting, and a photograph, black and white, faded. A young Japanese woman, thin with a splinted arm and a bandage over her eye, standing next to a young nurse in a white uniform. Eleanor's knees went weak. She sat down hard on her couch. "That is me," she whispered. "That is Saipan. That is 1944. Please, read the letter," Fujimoto said gently. His voice was soft and kind. Eleanor unfolded the pages. Her vision blurred with tears as she read. The handwriting was shaky, as if it had been written by someone in pain or great emotional distress. Dear Eleanor Hartwell, you do not know me anymore. 40 years is a long time, but I have never forgotten you. Not for one single day. Not for one single moment. When I was brought to your hospital, I believed I was going to die. Our government told us that Americans were monsters, that they would torture us, violate us, kill us slowly, that they would cut off our fingers and our ears and our hair as trophies. I was so afraid that I wanted to die quickly, just to escape the pain I knew was coming. I had heard stories. My older sister had told me stories of what happened to women who were captured. I believed that death would be a mercy, but you did not hurt me. You cleaned my wounds. You gave me water. You covered me with a blanket. You looked at me like I was a person, not an enemy, not a thing to be disposed of. A person, a human being with a name and a face and a life that mattered. Do you understand what that meant to me? Do you understand what it meant to a girl who had been told her entire life that she was worth less than the dirt beneath an American's feet? You saw me. You really saw me. And you chose to be kind anyway. I survived the war. I was repatriated to Japan in 1946. My country was destroyed. My family was gone, burned in the firebombing of our city. I had nothing. No home, no family, no future. For months after I came home, I could barely leave my bed. I had nightmares every night. I would wake up screaming, convinced that I was back in the hospital, that the kindness had all been a dream, and that the torture was about to begin again. The doctors said I had a sickness of the mind. They did not have a name for it then, but I know now that it was trauma. It was the weight of war crushing down on me, but I had the memory of your kindness. It kept me alive through the darkest times. When I wanted to kill myself, when I stood on the edge of the bridge and looked down at the water, I thought about you. I thought about the American nurse who treated me like I was worth something. And I decided that if I could survive, if I could live, then I could honor what you had done for me. I could make my survival mean something. I could make your kindness matter. I rebuilt my life. It was not easy. I became a teacher. I taught children about peace, about seeing the humanity in everyone, even in enemies. I married a good man. We had 2 daughters. I told them about you, about the American nurse who saved my life not with medicine but with compassion. I told them that in the middle of a war that killed millions, one act of kindness saved one life, and that one life mattered. I told them that you were my hero, that you were the reason I believed that the world could be better than the hatred and the violence we had seen. For 40 years I have searched for you. I wrote letters to the U.S. Navy, to veteran organizations, to anyone who might help me find you. I never stopped looking. There were times when I thought I would never find you, times when I thought you might be dead, or that you would not want to hear from me, that you would have forgotten that moment in 1944, but I could not let it go. I could not move forward without telling you what you meant to me. I am dying now. Cancer. The doctors say I have weeks, maybe days. I will not live to see you again. That is my greatest regret. But I needed you to know. I needed you to know that what you did mattered. That in the middle of a war that killed millions, one act of kindness saved one life, and that one life touched hundreds of others. I raised 2 daughters who became doctors. They have saved countless lives. My students became teachers, engineers, peacemakers. The ripples of your compassion spread farther than you could ever imagine. I have asked these 4 officers to find you after I am gone, to bring you this letter, to tell you in person what I could not. Thank you. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for treating me like a human being when the world said I was the enemy. Thank you for giving me back my life. Thank you for reminding me what it means to be human. Thank you for being the kind of person that the world needs more of. With eternal gratitude and deepest respect, Harumi Nakamura. Eleanor could not breathe. She read the letter again and again. She could not stop reading it. The words kept hitting her, over and over, each one a small shock. Harumi had survived. Harumi had lived. Harumi had thought about her every day for 40 years. Eleanor had spent 40 years wondering if that moment had mattered, if she had done the right thing, if Harumi had made it home. And all that time, Harumi had been wondering about her too. They had been wondering about each other across an ocean and across decades, separated by language and geography and the scars of war, but connected by that one moment of kindness. Eleanor looked up at the 4 officers standing in her living room. They were crying too. Even Captain Tanaka, the oldest and most formal of them, had tears running down his weathered face. "We received a call from Mrs. Nakamura's family 3 months ago," Tanaka said, his voice thick with emotion. "They told us that her final wish was that we complete this mission. She wanted you to know that you were her hero, that she spent 40 years trying to repay a debt she said could never be repaid. She wanted you to know that your kindness changed her life, that it changed her family's life, that it changed the lives of everyone she touched." Eleanor wiped her tears with the back of her hand. She did not know what to say. She had spent 40 years assuming that moment was forgotten, that it had mattered only to her, that it was just one small act in a war that had consumed millions. But Harumi had not forgotten. Harumi had carried that moment with her for 40 years. She had let it define her life. She had let it guide her choices. She had let it teach her that kindness was possible even in war. Even when everything told you to hate, you could choose love. You could choose compassion. You could choose to see the humanity in your enemy. Commander Ito stepped forward and placed a wooden box on Eleanor's coffee table. He opened it slowly and reverently. Inside, nestled in silk, was a medal, the Order of the Sacred Treasure, one of Japan's highest civilian honors. Eleanor gasped. She had never expected anything like this. She had never done what she did for recognition. She had done it because it was the right thing to do. She had done it because Harumi was a human being, and human beings deserve to be treated with dignity. "The Japanese government does not give this lightly," Ito said, his voice formal and careful. "Mrs. Nakamura petitioned for 10 years to have you recognized. She documented everything, the date, the location, the hospital. She even found Dr. Samuel Wright, who confirmed your identity and your actions. She told him that you had saved her life, that you had shown her kindness when no one else would. Dr. Wright, before he died, wrote a letter confirming your service and your character. This medal is given to those who have made significant contributions to Japan's development and peace. You did that, Miss Hartwell. In 1944, you planted a seed of peace in the middle of war. That seed grew. It became a forest of kindness and compassion and hope." Major Kobayashi pulled out a folder. Inside were dozens of photographs. Eleanor's hands shook as she looked through them. Harumi as a young teacher, surrounded by smiling children. Harumi on her wedding day in a traditional white kimono, smiling with her whole face. Harumi holding her newborn daughters, one in each arm, exhausted and happy. Harumi as a grandmother, silver-haired and smiling, surrounded by family. In every photo, she looked happy, alive, real, solid. Not a ghost from the past, but a person who had lived a full life. She lived a good life, Kobayashi said softly. Because of you. She became a teacher. She won awards for her work with children. She wrote 3 books about peace and reconciliation. She traveled to America twice, hoping to find you. She visited Saipan in 1972, and she went to the hospital. It was abandoned by then. But she stood where you had stood, and she cried. She told us that she could still feel your presence there, that she could still feel the kindness that you had shown her. Eleanor looked at the photographs for a long time. She studied Harumi's face as she aged, as she changed, as she lived. She saw the happiness in her eyes, the peace in her smile. She saw the life that Eleanor's one act of kindness had made possible. And she understood, finally, what Harumi had been trying to tell her. That kindness was not a small thing. That one moment of compassion could echo through 40 years. That it could touch lives you would never meet. That it could change the world in ways you could never predict. Lieutenant Fujimoto handed Eleanor another envelope. Inside were letters, dozens of them, from Harumi's daughters, from her students, from people Eleanor had never met, would never meet, all saying the same thing. Thank you. Thank you for saving our mother. Thank you for saving our teacher. Thank you for giving us the chance to know her. Thank you for reminding us that the world can be kind. Eleanor read each letter carefully. She let each word sink in. She let each expression of gratitude wash over her. And as she read, she began to cry, not from sadness but from relief, from the release of 40 years of wondering, from the knowledge that she had not been forgotten, that she had mattered, that her kindness had not been wasted on an empty gesture, but had actually changed a life, had actually made a difference. "Why?" she whispered when she could finally speak again. Why go to all this trouble? Why travel halfway around the world for something that happened 40 years ago? Why spend so much time looking for me? Captain Tanaka knelt down so he was eye level with Eleanor. Because, Miss Hartwell, in a world that teaches us to hate, you chose love. In a war that dehumanized millions, you chose to see one person, one enemy, and you treated her with dignity. That is not a small thing. That is everything. We came because the world needs to remember that even in the darkest times, even when everything tells us to choose cruelty, we can choose kindness. We came because Harumi Nakamura spent 40 years making sure your story was not forgotten. We came because you deserve to know that what you did mattered, that it mattered more than you could have ever imagined. Eleanor looked down at the medal in the box, at the letters in her lap, at the photograph of a young nurse and a young prisoner, two women who should have been enemies. Frozen in time, she thought about all the years she had lived quietly, believing she had done nothing special, just her job, just what any decent person would do. She had been wrong. It had mattered. It had mattered more than anything else she had done in her life, more than all the years of nursing, more than all the lives she had helped, because this one moment had created a ripple effect that had touched hundreds of people. She looked up at Captain Tanaka, her eyes clear now, her tears dried. "Is there anything you would like us to tell her family?" he asked gently. Eleanor thought for a long moment. She thought about all the things she wished she could say to Harumi, all the questions she wanted to ask, all the things she wanted to know about the life that Harumi had lived. But mostly, she wanted them to know one thing. "Tell them," she said, her voice steady now, "that I never forgot her either. Tell them that in 40 years, I have thought about her 1,000 times, wondered if she survived, hoped she found peace. Tell them that she gave me something too. She reminded me why I became a nurse, to heal, to help, to see people, not enemies, to understand that every life matters, every single one. Tell them that knowing she lived a good life, that she was happy, that she had a family and students and love, that is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. Tell them that I am grateful, grateful that she survived, grateful that she remembered me, grateful that she took the time to find me." The 4 officers stood at attention and saluted. Eleanor Hartwell, former U.S. Navy nurse, stood slowly, her old knees creaking, and saluted back. In her small living room in Portland, Oregon, 40 years after a war that had tried to destroy the world, 2 former enemies honored each other. The rain had stopped. Through the window, the sun broke through the clouds, painting everything gold. Captain Tanaka bowed deeply. On behalf of the people of Japan, on behalf of Harumi Nakamura and her family, and on behalf of everyone who believes that kindness is stronger than hate, thank you, Miss Hartwell. Thank you for reminding us what it means to be human. Thank you for showing us that even in war, even when everything tells us to hate, we can choose to love. That is the greatest gift one human can give another. After the officers left, Eleanor sat alone in her living room holding the photograph. She looked at the young woman she had been, 23 years old, exhausted, scared, trying to do the right thing in a world gone mad. She had thought that moment was lost to history. Just another day in a war full of days. Just one small act of kindness in a world full of cruelty. But it had not been lost. It had been carried across decades and oceans, held carefully in the heart of a woman who refused to forget. Eleanor placed the photograph on her mantle next to the medal. She would tell this story now. She would make sure people knew, not because she was a hero, but because Harumi Nakamura had taught her something profound. That in the end, after all the battles are fought and all the borders are drawn, what remains is not the hatred. What remains is the moment when one person chose to see another person and said, "You matter. You are worth saving. You are human, just like me." And that, Eleanor thought as she looked out her window at the garden she had planted, at the roses blooming in October sun, at the tomatoes growing red and ripe in the fading light. That is how wars truly end. Not with treaties or surrenders, not with victory parades or monuments, but with the quiet, radical act of choosing compassion when the world demands cruelty. Harumi Nakamura had lived 40 more years because of one choice Eleanor made in 1944. And in those 40 years, Harumi had touched hundreds of lives. Her daughters, her students, her grandchildren. All of them walking the earth because one nurse in a military hospital decided that even enemies deserve dignity. The mathematics of kindness, Eleanor realized, are infinite. One act multiplies into 2, into 10, into hundreds, into generations. We never know how far our choices will travel. We never know whose life we might save. We never know whose entire future we might change by a single moment of compassion. All we can do is choose in each moment to be human, to see the person in front of us, to recognize their suffering, to understand that they are not so different from us, that they too have a mother who loves them, that they too have dreams and fears and hopes, that they too deserve to be treated with dignity. Eleanor picked up the phone. She called the local newspaper. She called the Veterans Association. She called the library where she volunteered. She called everyone she could think of. This story, she decided, needed to be told. Not for her, for Harumi, for every person who had ever wondered if their small acts of kindness mattered. They did. They always did. As the sun set over Portland, Eleanor Hartwell, 63 years old, former Navy nurse, recipient of Japan's Order of the Sacred Treasure, sat in her garden and cried. Not from sadness, from gratitude. For Harumi Nakamura, who had spent 40 years making sure that one moment of compassion was not forgotten. For the 4 officers who had traveled across the world to deliver a message of thanks. And for the strange, beautiful truth that even in war, even in hatred, even in the darkest moments humanity has ever known, love finds a way. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. History is not just about battles and dates. It's about moments like these. Moments when ordinary people choose extraordinary compassion. Moments when one person's kindness echoes through time, touching lives they will never meet, changing the world in ways they could never imagine. Let's make sure these stories are never forgotten.